Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Renee Mehrra. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Tarunjit Singh Butalia from United States. He's the author of the book, My Journey Home, Coming Back to Lehnda Punjab. Also joining Dr. Butalia is Dr. Mazhar Abbas from Pakistan. He is one of the translators of the book of Dr. Butalia in Shahmukhi Punjabi. Gentlemen, welcome. Dr. Tarunjit Singh Butalia is the executive director for Religions of Peace in the United States. He's also on the board of trustees for the Parliament of the World Religions for the last 12 years. He is on the advisory committee of the Global Sikh Council and the founding trustee of the Sikh Council for Interfaith Relations. Dr. Mazhar Abbas, he's a professor of history at the Government College in Faisalabad. He did his PhD in world history from Shanghai University in China, and he writes regularly for English dailies in Pakistan, the News and Daily Times, on the history of Punjab, as well as on South Asia. Dr. Butalia, tell us about your book, which was first time it was released in 2020. It's going to be released again this year in September, October. Tell us the genesis behind your book.
Thank you, Renee, first of all, for inviting myself and my brother, Mazhar Abbas, on this wonderful forum that you have. This book began, and I've been thinking about this book, in fact, I think began about 50 years ago. And what you see here on the screen is the lady who's in the middle is my grandmother. And I am standing with the big top knot that I have is I'm standing next to her here. I was essentially the golden-eyed child of my grandma. So when my mom and dad went away for anything, I could do anything. My grandma would never say no to me. So I could do nothing wrong and my sister could do nothing right. So she was the one who conveyed to me when I was about 7 years old onwards of where she lived before the partition, where she went to college. Most of that rotated around Lahore. She then talked about our ancestral village. She talked about how my ancestors owned 42 villages, which in Punjabi, the word is Batali, and that's where the derived name of Butalia came into place. So she had told me all these stories, and I thought that they were probably half true. Okay, to be frank, okay? Some of our elders do exaggerate. But as I grew up, and particularly once I came to the US about 32 years ago, I had time to do some research and I found out that what my grandma indeed had told me was in fact true. And what shocked me the most, I would say, of everything is while doing some research on the family, I came across villages, which you see on the screen here, and which were owned by our family. And when I went down this list, guess what the total number is? It is 42. That's when I had goosebumps. Now I knew that what my grandmother had told me was indeed true. So this led me then to look further into my own family history. And then when I did that, I was quite surprised to find this information. Our family traces its roots back to the grandfather of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Sardar Charan Singh. And there are records available which date all the way back to 1739 AD, and then goes to Ranjit Singh's father, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and his two successors. As someone, graduate student who has a lot of time on his hands at Ohio State, I read a lot of books, and then in 2019, I had the opportunity to go to Pakistan only for 12 days, just for 12 days. And this book was written about a year. I was there in December 2019 for just 13 days. And when I came back, I read down and I wrote the book in English, in different parts. And Mazhar Abbas and Khizar Jawad then helped translate the book into Shahmukhi Punjabi.
Right. So this book is actually the time of partition, the Indo-Pak partition, which left a lot of scars, has left a lot of scars on both sides. There was egregious crimes, brutalities, atrocities. At the same time, there was this story has a different angle to it. It talks about hope and empathy and compassion and kindness. And you went back to your ancestral roots over 70 years later to see your grandparents' place and just reconnect yourself with those ancestral roots. Dr. Abbas, you are the one with Dr. Khizar Jawad, who also teaches history in the Foreman Christian College, that's a chartered university in Lahore. And both of you translated this book from English to Shahmukhi Punjabi. I mean, there are two dialects, one is Shahmukhi and Gurmukhi. So you translated it into Shahmukhi Punjabi. Tell us, how did you meet Dr. Butalia?
Thank you very much, Renee. Actually, I was doing my PhD in those days. I submitted my thesis in 2020, in March 2020, my PhD dissertation, and I was free. I was waiting for the reports and the final defense of my PhD thesis. And in the meanwhile, Khizar Jawad contacted me. We have been together from last 15, 20 years, Khizar and me. We have been studying together at Qaeda University, Islamabad, so we are good friends. So he contacted me and he requested me to translate a single piece from English to Gurmukhi, to Shahmukhi Punjabi. And without any hesitation, I started translating the piece. And after translating the piece, I didn't send to Khizar Jawad the translation. Before sending him the translation, I just requested him and asked him, who has written this piece? And then he questioned me, why are you asking? And I told him that the person who has written this piece is basically is written by his heart. So he has translated his emotions through his pen. He has some sort of qualities that we can say just like God-gifted qualities. There are only a few people in this world who can translate their emotions through their pen or their words. So then he told me that he has a friend from America, and he is known as Tarunjit Singh Butalia, and he has requested him to translate this piece. So Khizar told me that I have translated 2 or 3 pieces already, but nowadays I'm busy. So I just requested you to translate this piece. And then later on, he sent me another piece to translate. After I think 2 or 3 pieces, these 2 guys, Tarunjit Singh Butalia and Khizar Jawad, they told me that we are planning to, translate the whole book. So we were just trying to check out whether you are committed with this project or not, that you can translate this book or not. So I just want to tell you that it was one of the most challenging tasks of my academic life, because it was not only the translation of the words. I have to keep in my mind, I have to bear in my mind that I have to translate the emotions as well.
Right, exactly.
So that was basically a challenge for me.
And
so that's how we came in contact.
And were you very fluent in Shahmukhi Punjabi? I mean, the dialect?
This is my mother tongue, and I can say that I have more command over Shahmukhi Punjabi than English and Urdu.
I see.
Which I think is quite interesting, Renee, that before 1947, most Punjabis were fluent in both Gurmukhi and Shahmukhi. But for the last 75 years, there has been this division where those on the west side will only write in Shahmukhi and those on the east side will only write Gurmukhi, but that is changing now because of social media. So what the social media has done, in fact, is the borderline between India and Pakistan, Charda or Lehnda Punjab, is still there, but it is becoming less relevant. We are able to transcend the line between the 2 countries through social media and also now through the Kartarpur corridor. It is interesting how technology is now helping us transcend the man-made borders that we have.
Right. And this is Lehnda Punjab. So viewers who are not very familiar with what that is, that's the Punjab that is now in Pakistan.
I would let Mazhar talk about that.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Abbas.
Yeah, people usually say that it's Indian Punjab and Pakistani Punjab, but we prefer to call it Lehnda Punjab and Chadda Punjab. So the Eastern Punjab, that is a part of Indian Punjab, India, and the Western Punjab, that is part of Pakistan, we call it Lehnda Punjab. So it's basically, you can say, the sun rises from the east and sets in the west.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So
right.
so so that's
The rising sun is Chadda Punjab, and as he said,
So
Chadda
that's-
Punjab and Lehnda Punjab. Okay.
yes.
yeah, that's how we relate it to the sunrise and the sunset.
Yeah, right.
And even today in villages, what you'll find is when you go and visit a village and ask, where is this place? People generally will say, this is on the Chadda side or is on the Lehnda side. So even in today's villages, directions typically are known by, is it on the side where the sun rises in the village or the side the sun sets? And this is true both in Chadda and Lehnda Punjab even today.
So, Dr. Butalia, I mean, you traveled all the way and you again went back recently back to Lehnda Punjab, then met up with your grandparents' family that had helped them. And so share that experience with us and those experiences that really have touched your heart.
Sure. Let me begin first. I think there are four. I thought about what are some of my favorite experiences, and I will be brief in each of those. The first one is that my grandmother had told me that outside our ancestral home, which is in the village Butalia, and the village still is called Butalia Chanda Singh, named after my ancestor, that on the outside of our Haveli or our old home was a black peacock. So my eyes really popped up, and that is the reason why you see the cover of the book that is behind me is this black peacock. This black peacock is made of burnt bricks. So this was, and there are other buildings in Pakistan I have seen in villages which are made of burnt bricks. And so this black peacock is the one that got me home. So I'm eternally grateful. And I say this peacock is very stubborn because it waited for 72 years for me to come. When I went back this year, this particular building is a school for girls. And school buildings have to be maintained. And now this entire front facade that you see is covered in plaster. So now I say that this peacock is not only stubborn and black, it's very clever. It showed me my ancestral home and is still there, but is hiding behind the plaster. It is still there. It has not gone away, but in a way, it has completed its purpose. My second reflection that I find most favorite is I knew from the history of the family that the earliest ancestor that I know of was Rai Pagmal from Multan. He visited Pakpatan when Baba Farid, as many of you might know, about 130 of Baba Farid's shloks are in Guru Granth Sahib. My ancestor Rai Pagmal visited him in 1255 AD when he himself was alive, Baba Farid, and he organized a langar, or what is called Pandara. Langar, by the way, is a Persian word. And langar among Sufis of Punjab predates significantly the Sikh gurus. And so he did a Pandara or a langar, and Baba Farid gave him the honorific title of Pandari. So now I go back after 762 years to the same langar.
Wow.
And eat there and serve the food. It was quite interesting for me that men and women eat together. And when we were sitting and eating, our Muslim driver, who actually was sitting here before the picture was taken, you see there's a plate here, we ran short of plates. So we both were given one plate and we both had to eat from the same plate. And I think it is when we eat together that barriers break down. The third incident, and I leave the most nostalgic one towards the end, is that the friend of mine who accompanied me on my first trip in 2019, his name is Jahadad Khan. And so he took me for the 12 days. And when I was there, we talked about our families, and we in fact found out that in the early 1800s, our families had been arch rivals. That in history, Jahadad Khan's Tanoli family and the Butalia clans had clashed many, many times. So, we recognize that, but now, we are brothers in arms together. I'm good friends with him. He promised me that he would take me out on the Indus River. The Indus River, after a dam was built on the Indus River, is absolutely a humongous river. So he promised me that he would take me on a ride in the Indus River when I came next time. So when I went last year for the publication of the book, Jahadad Khan fulfilled his promise and he took me out on the Indus River. This is Jahadad Khan in the center, one of his friends from Norway, and I am on the other side. We are riding on the Indus. So I asked Jahadad Khan, where are we going? Jahadad Khan, for some reason, sidestepped the issue and wouldn't tell me where we are going. So I got a little suspicious. But, once we got onto the island, and before we got off the boat, and this is me, you'll see here on the boat, getting ready to get off the island. I asked Jahadad Khan, where are we? And he said, why didn't you step onto the island first? And as soon as I did, is when he said, look, you remember in history, in the our ancestors had a control of an island called Bharukot. I said, yes, there was a fort here. He said that, and I said, I know your ancestors drove my ancestors out of this island. Guess what? This is the island that survives now because the Indus River has now been dammed. The only time this island of Bharukot is visible is in winter because the snow is not melting. So this was so nostalgic for him to take me back to the place where his ancestors, chased my ancestors out in the 1830s. And my last favorite one, as you said, Renee, is I write in the book that my grandfather and grandmother, and I'll share a picture of them with you here. This is a picture around the time, I think this was just after partition, this picture of the two of them. I'm sorry, let me open it up again here. There we go. In fact, now let me show you a picture that is from around the partition time. And I'll tell you why I believe that is the case. Look at this picture, grandfather, grandmother, and look at these tents on the right-hand side. This gives me some indication that this picture was taken around the time of the partition. My grandmother and grandfather left our ancestral village, the picture that you see behind me here, this Haveli. They walked out through these very doors and they came to Lahore and took refuge with one of my grandfather's friend and his wife. I'm sure my grandmother would have told me the name, but it has been over 35 years since my grandmother passed away. I have come to the US for 32 years. I only remember very little that my grandmother told me of the family that gave them refuge. I don't remember the gentleman's name. What I do remember is that he worked in some sort of army or police kind of system. But I did remember the lady's name is Aminabi. That's all I remember. And so I wrote in the book, all this is listed. And I also wrote that one day, somebody in the neighborhood got suspicious that this Muslim family in Lahore was hiding somebody in their home. So when my grandfather's friend went to the masjid on Jummah or on Friday, the imam pulled him aside and asked him that I understand that you have some guests or Purana in Punjabi who are visiting with you. And he said, yes, indeed, this is my brother and his family. The Maulvi then proceeded to ask him to swear upon the Quran that this was his brother and his family, and he did so. Who am I, 72 years later, to claim that he took a false oath? If he thought that my grandfather was his brother, only then would he have kept him at such great risk. So I write all this in the book, but I had no idea which family that was. How can you imagine that miracles do happen after 72 years? You will be able to find the family that actually gave refuge to my grandparents. Somebody read a book, Professor Khizar Singh, who's a professor at Government College Lahore. He had taught in Gujranwala, where our ancestors had the city home, and he already knew the story. He knew about my grandfather's name. He knew which family. So I got to know from Kalyan Singh. So what I decided I would do was go and visit his son, who currently is the sitting member of parliament from Gujranwala. And I presented him the copy of my book. And we had great conversation. And he did some small talk for about an hour or so. And by that time, I was getting a bit anxious. And so finally, I asked Mahmood uncle, I said, did your father ever mention to you the story about my grandparents? He says, no, never, ever. So I said, where were you during your partition? He said, I was in our village, Ibn Wali, and he says, I vividly remember working with my grandfather in the village, his grandfather, in rescuing about 300 to 400 Hindu and Sikh families, putting them in a truck at night, taking them across the border. And then he fondly talked about this one brother and sister who were sick, who were left back, that his grandfather brought home, stayed with them for about 2 weeks before they were sent across. So then he said to me, he said, look, how are you so sure that it was my father who gave refuge to your grandparents? I said, I am not sure at all. I said, my grandmother must have told me the gentleman's name, but I don't remember that. I said, what I do remember is that he was in some sort of army or police. He said that could be true because he said my father, Ahmed Bashir Wirk, was in the taxation department, and the taxation department at that time in 1947 used to be semi-police kind of related department. And then he asked me, well, what is my father's name? I said, I have no idea. I said, no. What I do remember is his wife's name. And he asked me, he said, what is the name? And I just very softly, by then he had pulled me very close to him. So he said, why don't you come and sit on a chair next to him? We were sitting in his office in Gujranwala. And I very lightly said, Amina Bibi. I don't think he heard it the first time. So he said, could you say it louder? And I said loudly, Amina Bibi. He just kept quiet for a minute. And then he had tears in his eyes. He said, yes, my mother's name was Amina Bibi. And they did live in Lahore in 1947 in August, in September and October. They were in Lahore. So that is the day when I, like a little child, put my head in his lap and cried. And that's when I promised him that next time when I come to Pakistan, I will make it a point to go and visit the graveyard of both your mom and your dad. And that is something that I was fortunately able to do this time when I went back to Bashir Wirk, who is on my right, and his younger brother is on my left. This is the graveyard here to my left, which is of Ahmed Bashir Wirk, his father. And then I also had the opportunity to go and visit his mother's grave here, Amna Bibi. And when I went to both those graves, I knelt down towards the feet and I kissed the ground. There are many in the Muslim and the Sikh community who have criticized me for doing so. The Muslims claim that I am doing sajda, and we don't do sajda at or bow before graves. And some of my Sikh friends saying I'm doing matha tekna, which we don't do at graves. Beauty is the heart of the beholder. What I did here was kiss the grave from the feet side, and I did not thank them for what they did. There are some things in life that you cannot thank for. The way you express gratitude, not thankfulness, gratitude, is that is the prayer that I have, that may I, on everyone else in the world, be like Amna Bibi and Ahmed Bashir Wirk, each one of us. So that has been very nostalgic for me. And every time now when I go back again, I will be visiting their graves, not as a thank you, but as a sign of gratitude. And as you can tell, this has kind of seeped into me. A little part of my heart is now in Lahore and in Lehnda Punjab.
Wow. That's a very emotional story. And Dr. Abbas actually said that that there's so many emotions that were penned in that book in English, and he had to translate to keep the flavor. Dr. Abbas, can you and your family relate to those experiences that are written in the book?
First of all, I would like to tell you that me and my family, we had never experienced the partition. So we were settled here, we are settled here. So we don't went through this trauma, actually. I often used to call it partition of Punjab rather than the partition of the subcontinent. But when I started reading his chapters and translating his work, I realized that me and my family, we also went through this trauma. Because as I have already mentioned that Dr. Tarunjit Singh Butalia has been gifted by the God to translate his emotions through his pen. So when I started translating his work, when I translated his first chapter, I asked my friend Khizar Jawad, who has written this piece. Then he asked me, why are you asking? Then I replied that the person who has written this piece has written by his heart. He has the art of translating his emotions through his pen. And I have came through many experiences and many stories that he has written in his book. And there are many positive sides as well that we are often not told about the party. And for example, as Butalia has explained very well, that his parents, his grandparents were basically rescued by a Muslim family, and they even have to tell the Imam Masjid that that the person who is residing in his home is his real brother. So he has to take the oath. And also the thing is that we have to portray, we have to propagate, we have to tell the people about these positive sides and positive story. We have been taught, we have been told the negative side of the partition, that the people, they killed each other. Many women, around about 75,000 women were raped, and the children, they lost their parents. Either both parents, or in some cases mother, in some cases father. So many families, they were uprooted and they were resettled in both sides of the Punjab. It is one of the, I think it is the largest partition in the human history. So it's a kind of basically trauma. But there are many other things that he has given messages through his book. For example, he has in Pakistan, we are not familiar with the history of emotions. Like I've been teaching in Government College University Festival for last 12 years, but we don't teach students, even we don't read about the history of emotions. But the Butalia has told us that there is another aspect in the history, that is history of emotions. So how to write, how to translate, how to communicate the emotions through historical context, in historical context.
The partition brought in its wake a lot of bloodshed and violence and turbulence, films made on that. There is also stories of compassion and empathy and kindness. And this book, there's a universal message that's coming out in this book, which transcends it. So both sides suffered immensely. And I think this book is going to be again released as we celebrate both countries' independence, the 75th year of India's and Pakistan's independence.
Absolutely. We are always, as a Sikh, we believe in Chardi Kala, that is everlasting, uplifting spirits. But to do that, we cannot ignore our past. So first thing I think we as Punjabis need to do is share the stories of suffering and hope and gratitude that have happened. And the story of my family is not unique. This has hundreds and thousands of people have gone through this in Charda Punjab and in Lehnda Punjab. There have been thousands and thousands of Muslim families who were saved by their Hindu and Sikh neighbors in Charda Punjab. So this story is not unique. Yet at the same time, we have to reconcile with one fact, that while we respect our elders, and when I say elders, I mean our grandparents' generation in particular, yet we might blame Nehru, Gandhi, or the British, for the partition. But who butchered the trains on both sides? Our ancestors did. We have to take not individual, but collective responsibilities that there is something in our DNA that of decades and hundreds of years long friendship in 1947 resulted in mass killings and raping men who were like our mothers and sisters. So we first have to reconcile with this fact. So we can't say somebody else did it, okay? The British got it done, we did it ourselves. So we take a collective responsibility. And then there is a line I believe, and I like Mazhar, then to add to what I'm saying after I'm done. I believe what worries me, Renee and Mazhar, is not the physical line between India and Pakistan. What worries me is the line that Indians and Pakistanis have drawn in their heart. That people who are on the other side are bad people. They are our enemies. I think that is the line that needs to change. And once the line changes, Renee, as you know, where you live, between your home and your neighbor's home, there is a wall, right? But you don't say that the person who lives on the other side is my enemy. So this wall of enmity or partition can become a wall of neighbors and friendliness. And that, I think, is the challenge for our generation and the next generation, is to transcend this line of enmity and make it a line of friendship.
What we need to reverse is that we need to, uproot the hatred, the animosity from the hearts of the people. And that is quite a difficult job. Professor Butalia has mentioned in his book that through the Kartarpur corridor, many Pakistani and Indians, they make friends through Facebook, and then they plan to meet with each other at the Kartarpur corridor. They meet and they, exchange gifts and exchange ideas, and they make friends with each other at the Kartarpur corridor. So this is the thing we need to do, that we let people to meet each other. People-to-people contact can change the perception about the people living on the other side of the border. That is the main thing, that we need to let it happen.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Tarunjit Singh Butalia, author of My Journey Home, going back to Lehnda Punjab, and Dr. Mazhar Abbas, who teaches history at the Government College University in Lyallpur. He was one of the translators of this book in Shahmukhi Punjabi, along with Dr. Jawad, who teaches history also at the Foreman Christian College University, which is Chartered University in Lahore. Thank you, both of you gentlemen, and wish you all the best. I believe, Dr. Abbas, you're coming up with a book on the women's land rights in Pakistan.
Yes.
I'm Dr. Renee Mehrra. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy, stay positive. If you have a story to share, please do send us an email. Until next week, take care.